What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in light of X-Men 97, the talk of the town is the Shi'ar Empire and Vulcan specifically. So, this is the story where he conquers the Shi'ar Empire and then tries to start conquering the universe, and it's amazing. So this is called Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire, and this all basically began in a story called X-Men Deadly Genesis. We have covered it. You'll find a link to that video at the end of this. The broad strokes of Deadly Genesis is that Gabriel Summers is the brother of Cyclops that not even Cyclops knew he had. And the reason for that was because the mother of Cyclops, Catherine, was pregnant with Gabriel at the time that both Catherine and Cyclops' father, Christopher, were kidnapped by a race called the Shi'ar. The Shi'ar are just any number of races that exist out there within the Marvel Universe that have a great big huge expansive empire. We'll talk about them more as we get through this video. But the important thing here is that where the story of Cyclops and Havoc sees them basically being sent away by their parents, right, literally thrown out of the plane with parachutes before the Shi'ar can successfully kidnap everybody, and ultimately Cyclops goes on to join the X-Men. The story of Gabriel is that when his mother and Christopher, his father, are taken to the Shi'ar Empire, Christopher tries to engineer an escape. Ultimately, he's successful in doing it, but Catherine dies in the process. Gabriel is taken from the body of Catherine. He's aged up from a baby to basically a teenager. He manages to make an escape when his powers manifest, and then he arrives on Earth. Things transpire, and again, all that's covered in X-Men Deadly Genesis, but in that story, he ultimately learns that the Shi'ar Empire are the ones responsible for his mother's death. And so at the end of Deadly Genesis, he travels to the Shi'ar Empire with the intention of conquering it and then setting his sights on conquering the universe. And that's where this picks up, because what ends up happening is that at the end of Deadly Genesis, while Vulcan takes off to the Shi'ar Empire, Professor Xavier forms another X-Men team to go after Vulcan. Now, there is a reason why you don't really see Cyclops here, and that really pertains to the events of House of M, decimation, the fact that there's so few mutants on Earth, and basically the fact that Xavier was kicked out of the X-Men. There is a whole reason behind that. We can cover that in a future video if you guys are interested. But what is important here is that Xavier was captured, right? He was captured by Vulcan, who isn't really the leader of the Shi'ar race yet. And Darwin is the one who's overseeing everything. Now, what you also have here is a guy by the name of Dekin. Those of you guys who remember X-Men the animated series, you probably remember Dekin as a guy who was the emperor of the Shi'ar race at one point. He had long since been in a comatose state. And the way this worked is that when Vulcan showed up on the scene, Vulcan was taken by the Shi'ar. He was captured as well. But ultimately, he ends up meeting with Deathbird, who is the sister of Lilandra, who's the actual empress, the ruler of the Shi'ar Empire. The kicker about all this is that Deathbird kind of leads really like a revolutionary force, right? A group of people who don't believe that Lilandra is an effective empress. So she allies herself with Vulcan. Vulcan uses his powers to heal Dekin. Dekin will become the new emperor to replace Lilandra, and that as a kind of payment for his actions, that Vulcan would marry Deathbird. And what that would do is it would get Vulcan actually into the Shi'ar Empire, because then he could just orchestrate any number of things. None of those things will transpire the way anybody expects them to, and it is really cool the way this goes down. And so what you do here is you pick up with kind of the combined forces of the Starjammers and this X-Men team. Now, the Starjammers, again, if you watched X-Men the animated series, you know who they are. The Starjammers, if we're being quite honest with ourselves, we're like the Guardians of the Galaxy before the Guardians of the Galaxy, at least the ones that you're traditionally familiar with from like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But Christopher Summers, the father of Cyclops, he runs the Starjammers. He leads that entire team. But they also have Lilandra with them, because what happens is that with Lilandra kept safe, what it means is that no matter what happens within the Shi'ar Empire, Lilandra's life can be preserved, and then once the battle's fought and quote-unquote the good guys, the forces of Lilandra win, the loyalists, if you want to call them that, she can retake the throne. But for right now, she is to a degree in hiding. But once she learns the Shi'ar are in possession of Professor Xavier, she travels, or at least has the Starjammers, take her back to the Shi'ar Empire homeworld. The reason for that is because while Lilandra and Professor Xavier are not a romantic couple now, they were at one point. So she very much cares about him and she very much loves him. And Vulcan knows this, right? With Lilandra out of the picture, he knows that because they have Xavier and there is a psychic link between Xavier and Lilandra, she will come for him. And when that happens, they'll take her, right? They'll literally take her, capture her, probably execute her, and that will lead to essentially the forces of Daken, Vulcan, and Deathbird seizing control of the Shi'ar Empire. It's a coup d'etat. If we're being honest, like if we're giving it a name, it's a coup. That's really all this is. And so when Lilandra and the X-Men arrive on the scene, you also have Rachel Summers. Now, here's the thing. Rachel Summers is an absolute demon in Marvel Comics. This chick is so powerful. She's actually the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey from the Days of Future Past timeline, who traveled back to the modern era and has basically been here ever since. But she is almost as powerful as Jean. And in fact, there was a point where Rachel did have possession of the Phoenix Force. She's just crazy OP. But the team, of course, also has Nightcrawler, because this guy's clutch. Nightcrawler is one of the most slept on characters in Marvel, in the sense that like writers just never really use him as effectively as they could. But if you're going to go on any kind of a mission, Nightcrawler is a guy that you want on your side, because he can get you in and out of anywhere almost instantaneously. They also have Lorna Dane, also known as Polaris. She's actually the second daughter of Magneto and has all of Magneto's powers, the ability to manipulate the electromagnetic spectrum. Of course, you have Havoc, whose powers are very similar to Cyclops. Not exact, but close enough that it kind of works here. But there is an important conversation that takes place when Lilandra ends up making her way onto the Shi'ar homeworld, and she meets with a guy that she just never really wanted to meet with, or at least that she never thought that she would end up freeing. And this guy's name is General Cardoom, I think is how you pronounce it. The Shi'ar names are pronounced really kind of wonky. But this guy has basically been a major leader within the Shi'ar Empire for quite some time. And in fact, he was instrumental in allowing Vulcan to effectively escape, and even kind of helping to foment insurrection against Lilandra and the creation of this coup, this massive civil war that you see here. And one of the things he says is that he had lost faith in Lilandra, that as far as the Shi'ar Empire was concerned, it's not really like the Kree or the Skrulls in Marvel Comics, which is to say the Kree Empire is all Kree. That's it. It's just the Kree race, nothing else. The Skrull Empire is the exact same way. The Shi'ar Empire is very similar to like the Covenant from Halo, if you guys are familiar with that. That is basically an empire composed of a variety of different races, all of whom come from territories that the Shi'ar had conquered over the course of its existence. But under Lilandra, the Shi'ar was arguably a stagnant empire, in the sense that it didn't really engage in conquest and expansion. It just kind of sat back and just enjoyed everything that it had. But a lot of people like this general only ever really wanted war and expansion. And a lot of the people that followed Daken wanted the exact same thing. So they saw Lilandra as a non-effective leader here. Hence the reason why so many people worked against Lilandra in the first place. But the reality here is some people are starting to see that it was the wrong decision to make. And that's why you see some defecting in order to travel back to Lilandra. In this instance, this conversation she has with the general, she says, "You turned against me and failed, shaming yourself and your family. Now your empress is asking you to be a soldier once more and to restore your lost honor." Because one of the things to know about the Shi'ar Empire is that it's also kind of a class system. So if you lose your honor, people look at you funny. And in fact, you could lose your place within the Shi'ar, that you as a person are imprisoned and your family like loses their home, they're kind of cast out in society. And so by him restoring his honor, by siding with Lilandra, it restores the family name. But then you switch over to a conversation between Vulcan and Darwin. Now, one of the things to know is that Darwin's powers are currently neutralized, and that's probably the best decision that Vulcan could have made, because Darwin is an Omega level mutant that has the ability to adapt to any situation that he's in. So if, for example, you threw Darwin in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, he would develop gills and he would have the ability to swim underwater. If you put him in an atmosphere that was filled with, I don't know, carbon monoxide, his body would automatically develop the ability to survive in that environment. How you would do it, I have no clue. But the fact is, he's incredibly powerful. But the conversation between the two of them is all about the vengeance of Vulcan. And this feeds in to the other part of his origin story from X-Men Deadly Genesis. Again, we go into more detail in that video, which you'll find at the end of this, but the long and short here is that when Vulcan had originally escaped the Shi'ar Empire as a teenager and arrived on Earth, he didn't really know how to use his powers. All he knew was that he could just manipulate energy, and that was it. Now, we ultimately learned through like Moira McTaggart and Professor Xavier that he has the power to manipulate any and all forms of energy in existence. This guy is literally one comic book story arc away from being able to alter reality on a universal scale, and that it would be believable. But such as it is, like in X-Men Deadly Genesis, for example, Cyclops fired his optic beams at Vulcan, and Vulcan literally moved the beams around himself, and they went right back at Cyclops again. Like, everybody was powerless in comparison to this guy. It was nuts what he was able to do. But what we had learned was that when it came to Vulcan and Darwin's relationship, it all stemmed back to a secret X-Men team. That the way this played out was that there came a point when the original X-Men of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, and Angel were kidnapped on an island called Krakoa. Cyclops was sent by the island under the guise of quote-unquote escaping in order to recruit more people for the island to feed on. Xavier realized what was going on and put together what was in effect a kind of hodgepodge X-Men team. In essence, mutants that were not effectively trained on how to use their powers. This team included Gabriel Summers and Darwin. And so what ended up happening is everybody on the team was killed except for Cyclops, who led the team alongside Darwin and Gabriel. Ultimately, Darwin ended up using his powers to preserve Gabriel's life, and then Cyclops escaped and then arrived back, just kind of going crazy about how everybody had been killed. Xavier used his powers to wipe all knowledge from the mind of Cyclops of Gabriel Summers' existence and the secret X-Men team. And so as far as Cyclops was concerned, they had never existed and he never knew who they were. That's the reason why when Gabriel and Cyclops meet for the first time in Deadly Genesis, Cyclops doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't understand why Gabriel knows who Cyclops is. And so again, in the aftermath of House of M, Gabriel emerged, and of course, he's basically been around ever since. But what he does is he tells Darwin he intends to marry Deathbird, and then on the day of their wedding, he intends to execute Charles Xavier because he sees Charles Xavier as the catalyst for everything that happened to him alongside the Shi'ar. He basically sees them as enemies here, right? They're essentially bad guys. But what's really interesting is he intends to basically lock Xavier away in something called the M'Kraan Crystal. Now, the M'Kraan Crystal in Marvel Comics has a very lengthy history. It's been around for a long time, specifically since the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas in Marvel. But the important way to look at it, or at least the easiest way to see it, is the M'Kraan Crystal is actually a portal to the multiverse. So it'd be like walking into a hallway of doors, each door leading to a different reality. But those who were stuck inside the M'Kraan Crystal would basically be overwhelmed by its power if they're not able to overcome its power. In this case, the only ones who are really able to do that are the White Phoenix of the Crown, basically Jean Grey at the peak of her power. So Xavier will be destroyed by the crystal's power. That's really what that means, right? He would just kind of be incinerated here. And so in this wedding, you have Deathbird and Vulcan who officially get married to one another. But in the middle of this wedding, you suddenly have the forces of Lilandra, the Starjammers, and the X-Men who all arrive on the scene and start attacking everybody. Now, the kind of wild card here to a degree is the Imperial Guard, led by Gladiator. Now, Gladiator is one of a variety of characters that Marvel has that are all very, very closely based on Superman from DC, more than anybody else. What is interesting here is Gladiator and Hyperion are the closest to Superman, but Gladiator's a Strontian, so effectively he has pretty much all the powers of Superman, minus like Frost Breath, the more nuanced ones, but his powers are tied to his confidence. So if you start to get the upper hand on him and he starts to lose confidence, his powers will also wane as well. And then he's just easily defeated depending on how weak he is. But the attack here really kind of catches everybody by surprise. But with Vulcan, it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference because his intention is really just vengeance. That's his motivation for everything. Xavier launching a team and showing up here was more fortuitous for Vulcan than anything else. He would have eventually gone back to Earth with the entirety of the Shi'ar Empire and attacked it, in which case we saw in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers: The New Avengers how that plays out. Outside of someone like Tony Stark using the power of the sun to eradicate the entirety of the Shi'ar fleet, there's not a whole lot they would be able to do. Like, they'd be destroyed quite readily. And so basically Vulcan in this moment seizes control of Xavier and throws him into the Shi'ar crystal. Of course, the entire time this happens, Rachel Summers and Lilandra are forced to watch it take place. Now, you do have Gladiator that goes against the X-Men, and what's cool here is Gladiator dominates them all, right? He actually kind of dominates them a little more effectively than how you would see Vulcan do it. Vulcan breaks them down piece by piece, but Gladiator takes them all out in one fell swoop. That Lorna Dane is the first one to fall, followed by Rachel Summers and everybody else, until eventually there's Lilandra. Now, one of the things that I do want to specify here, Gladiator is not a bad guy. The nature of the Imperial Guard is they swear allegiance to the throne and whoever sits on that throne. So even though Lilandra is the current ruler, or at least supposed to be the ruler of the Shi'ar Empire, the reality is that she's not there. And in her absence, Deathbird and those guys have seized power, which means now Gladiator is beholden to Deathbird, and really by extension, Dekin and his forces seized power alongside Deathbird and Vulcan, which means now Gladiator is beholden to Dekin, and that's basically just the guy he's fighting on. It kind of sucks for him to do that, and even watching Xavier thrown into the crystal, while she screams out and cries about it, the response of Gladiator is to simply just grab her to keep her from like jumping in, because even though he serves the throne, it's not uncommon for Gladiator to kind of say, okay, and just let Lilandra escape and just say, I mean, there's nothing I can do, right? They just got away too fast, you know, that kind of thing, right? That kind of situation, right? He still has his loyalties, and he finds subtle ways to allow those loyalties to transpire in whatever kind of allows him to pursue whatever his goal is. But in the midst of Xavier being thrown into the crystal, Darwin jumps in. The response of Vulcan, I mean, that works for me, right? I mean, I don't have to fight him now, right? I don't have to worry about fighting Darwin. This, you know, two of these guys are effectively gone, no muss, no fuss. And what you get is just kind of like this massive civil war conflict between the forces of Lilandra and the forces of Dekin, Vulcan, and Deathbird, all of whom come to bear in the sense that everybody basically gets destroyed. But what happens here is that where Dekin takes this moment to kill his sister Lilandra, remove any potential threat of anybody taking the throne, because with her dead, there are no more Lilandra loyalists. Everybody who was on her side will fall in line, because what they know is that if they don't, Dekin will seek all of them out and he'll execute them all, right? Like the emperors and empresses within any particular empire, the Kree, the Skrull, the Shi'ar, the Badoon, Dire Wraiths, they do not tolerate dissent under any circumstance. But what's kicker here is that Vulcan steps in, immediately attacks Dekin, and then incinerates him on the spot using his power, because it's his way of getting revenge against Dekin for killing Catherine Summers, the mother of Vulcan, that Vulcan never forgot. And everybody watches this as it transpires. Everybody's just like, wow, like he literally just killed the Emperor. Now Deathbird steps in and says like, no, I trusted you, I thought you were on my side. His response, and I heard your wishes and respected them. You didn't want to rule. Now that we're married, you won't have to, because I claim Dekin's throne as my own. By right of blood and combat, my right of succession, I name myself Emperor Vulcan, ruler of the Shi'ar Imperium. Now, this is huge, because what this does is this sets in motion a conflict in Marvel called the War of Kings. And the War of Kings was a great story outside of Black Bolt and the Inhumans, because they're there, but they suck, so like who really cares? But it is a really awesome story. In fact, they're really like a major part of it, if we're being honest. But in effect, like Vulcan, with the full power of the Shi'ar Empire, will basically seek out and try to conquer the universe. But one of the things that does go on here is you pick up with Darwin inside what's called the White Hot Room, right? We're literally told time has no meaning here. All Darwin knows is the professor's screaming seems to come from everywhere at once. The M'Kraan crystal is too big to be truly defined. It can destroy the universe or a single man at its whim. It is fear and anger and power and knowledge. It is all things. It can break minds or alter them, open doors to splinters of reality or close them. Darwin feels it touch him, then leave him be as he follows the screams to his teacher. Then he realizes something. Xavier's screams are in his mind, not in his ears, and he knows he can find them a way out of here. The M'Kraan crystal does not want them. So that's an important thing to grasp here. Yes, like the inside of the M'Kraan crystal, the reason why this space is so white is because it's called the White Hot Room. That the White Hot Room to a degree is sentient, and in fact, it's actually the home of the Phoenix Force in Marvel Comics. Marvel doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail about whether or not the room itself is actually sentient. I've always kind of believed it was, to be honest, because even the room can kind of manifest things as it needs to, or it responds to the wishes of the people confined inside, even if they're not the white-hot Phoenix of the Crown, or they're not in possession of the Phoenix Force. So it is kind of a cool little caveat there. Of course, you do have Vulcan standing over Lilandra with the intention of executing her on the spot, but then you have Corsair who jumps in. Now, this is father versus son, and even Corsair is flabbergasted by what his son had been turned into. Never in a million years did he ever imagine that Catherine Summers, that his wife, would give birth to a child who would be hell-bent on conquering foreign empires with his sights set on the entirety of the universe itself. It just kind of leaves Corsair just taken by surprise. And so even then he tells his son, stop what you are doing. As your father, I am telling you, end this. The response of Vulcan, he kills his father on the spot, right? He kills Corsair right then and there, and that's it. In response to this, Havoc steps in. Now it's brother versus brother. Havoc is powerless against Vulcan, and that's one of the things that I do want to specify here. 99% of mutants in Marvel Comics use energy-based powers, at least the ones of any substantial power set in Marvel Comics. You do have characters like Beast and Wolverine who use like enhanced agility or enhanced strength or speed or something along those lines. But most mutants out there use some measure of telekinesis. They use some measure of telepathy. They use energy blasting abilities. Against someone like Vulcan, who can manipulate the electrons in the brain and shut off a person's access to their powers, they have no real hope against this guy. Someone like Havoc, who can just fire off energy blasts, Vulcan can just control those energy blasts and disperse them at every other person there. There's not a whole lot they can do, and that's why Havoc falls so quickly to the power of Vulcan. There's only one person here with the ability to take Vulcan down, and it's not Gladiator, and it's not the Imperial Guard, because they even asked the question of Deathbird, what do we do here, right? Like, I mean, how do we handle the situation? Her response, your Emperor is under attack. Protect your Emperor, which means now the Imperial Guard has to fight on the side of Vulcan. What ends up happening is even when Rachel Summers steps in, she's not powerful enough, because we saw in Deadly Genesis that Vulcan was able to take out Rachel Summers almost instantaneously by shutting off her access to her powers. So she's not enough to defeat this guy. What you end up getting is Lorna Dane, right? Polaris, because her energy-based powers are not predicated on telepathy or telekinesis. Her energy-based powers are predicated on the electromagnetic spectrum, which means all that is her power. The very suit that Vulcan wears, the metal in his suit, all the metal in the area around them, right? The very electromagnetic energy sphere itself, that's controlled by her. And so in effect, he's powerless against her, right? It's not enough to like destroy him, to eradicate him, but it is enough to keep him on the ropes. And so what ends up happening is you have a couple people who step up, they try to defeat him, but for the most part, everybody bails. They get out while they can, because what they know is that if they stay, it's only a matter of time before Vulcan overcomes the power of Polaris. Because understand, this is happening in a matter of seconds, right? Within like 2, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, certainly less than 5. It's not a lengthy conflict. It's not a long battle. You give Vulcan 6 or 7 minutes and he'll overcome Polaris quite readily, right? Shut off her powers, whatever it is, but it was a blitz attack. It just kind of came out of nowhere. Give him a moment to recover, and it's game over for everybody. And they all recognize that. So Nightcrawler teleports everybody out. Lilandra ends up going along with him, and they all effectively retreat. What it does is it leaves Vulcan there recovering from his injuries. Of course, Corsair's effectively dead, but nonetheless, they all end up getting out anyway. That it allows Vulcan to officially take the throne as the Emperor of the Shi'ar Empire. And it allows the X-Men to at least try to find some way back to Earth to warn Earth of what's happening. Because what they know is that Vulcan is going to expand control of the Shi'ar Empire. He's going to initiate a war in the universe, and it's only a matter of time before he comes to Earth. Again, that's why this leads directly into the War of Kings, then it goes into the Realm of Kings, then it goes into Cancerverse with Thanos, right? That's where it gets really, really interesting. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I will catch you all later. Peace.